Hey guys, Matt. Coming up is the full and complete list of the Abe Lincoln to Kennedy Synchronicities, Chapter 12 of the book. I just need to say a few things, maybe 2 or 3 minutes before I start the reading. Over the years, it has amazed me how many people in this community, for lack of better words, are like triggered by many of the things I've said, where I come forth and say, this life has to be some sort of simulation or a dream, or it's quantumly fluid. Things aren't real, a hologram, whatever you want to call it. There's almost no way to explain all the possible coincidences, synchronicities, how a certain script is being delivered, how it's delivered without people noticing. I've run into this many times where there's almost no other explanation. The Kennedy to Lincoln synchronicities are so astronomically remote by themselves, I don't know how anybody could get to me finishing the list. And there's about 50 more than what I'm about to present, but they're a little bit more of a stretch. I don't know how anybody could get to the end and say, well, that can happen. Or, yeah, it's just a coincidence. I don't know how. People will do that, and I have no idea how they could possibly do that. A 1 in 1,000 coincidence, I start to question it. 1 in 1 million, I don't buy it. 1 in 1 billion, I certainly don't buy. And this is well, in my opinion, over a 1 in 1 billion. But it's not just that they politely disagree. That Matt, I'll never get in line that this is some sort of quantumly fluid reality. Everything's real. It's not just that they're triggered by it. Many people get angry when you propose this. The same way Mandela affected people note when they try to talk to the people around them about it. The response is very angry, aggressive. It's not open. And that has happened to me over the years many times when presenting this type of information. So I actually changed the order of the book. I'm putting the Kennedy to Lincoln synchronicities up first before I present other chapters that talk about this life can't be real. Can't be. Well, to me, it can't be, because now the evidence is overwhelming. At the very least, though, we agree a script of some kind is running, and that's the main theme in this book, even if we disagree here. So the purpose of this chapter is just to soften people up. People that really would have put the roadblock up after you go through this Kennedy to Lincoln, the synchronicities. I don't know how you come out the other side and say, just a coincidence. People will. I don't know how. Thanks. Here it comes. Chapter 12. There are many people who will never accept that this life could be some sort of holographic simulation, some sort of matrix, not real in some way. I don't know how it's possible, but the entire section below, or the next few chapters, won't interest these people at all. A note to these people, stay with me if you can. I'll get to all the conspiracy you want after this section. From NASA's lies to 9/11 to the fake shootings and much, much, much more. Skip this section if you must, but pondering this stuff is truly mind-blowing to me. Whether this life is solid or some sort of matrix, our predicament living under the thumb of some sort of controlling psychopath or psychopaths is the same. Our common ground is much greater than what separates us, if this section's not for you. The notion that we live in some sort of artificial simulation or environment is a far greater possibility than saying anything is, quote, real per the standard definition. Actually, the simulated reality explanation seems to be the only way of making sense of this world anymore. Nothing adds up anymore if things are real. The notion of, quote, matrix reality actually lines up with common sense and what little indirect evidence exists to prove either side of the argument. Now, from what I just said, people will jump 100 miles forward and infer that I just said we live in the literal matrix from the movie with our bodies floating in some pod somewhere. No, but I am saying that I'm convinced that this reality is fluid in some way. To what degree, we don't exactly know. There's a very large scale between a rock being 100% real and solid and you and I living in the machine city of Neo's Matrix. Why do people like your author believe we live in a fluid reality of some kind, be it a simulation, hologram, illusion, dream, a matrix, holodeck, or something else? I'll present the overwhelming evidence over the next few chapters. For those who don't believe that the endless coincidence presented in this life implies a matrix, then it still exposes a script of some kind. There is no doubt a reality script of a very mysterious nature is being force-fed to us. Now, I don't see how a reality script is possible if everything is 100%, quote, real and solid, like my Rocks for Jocks teacher told me at Penn State. I guess life was all too real for those kids being molested by Jerry Sandusky, who was on the sideline of the football game when I was a freshman in the stands. Over and over we find the circumstances of our lives attached to impossible coincidence and synchronicity. How many times in your life have you said, "What are the chances that could happen?" The examples this book will soon lay out will blow your mind in this regard. There are thousands of examples that provide strong evidence that we live in some sort of simulation. There's almost no other explanation. For many people, the President Kennedy to President Lincoln synchronicities are so bizarre, so astronomically remote, they come to the conclusion that, yeah, something else is going on here. Just from this one example, many people will entertain a matrix reality theory. Just from this. How can what I'm about to present be explained away as a mere coincidence if a script of some kind is not running? Can you explain away a 1 in a billion as coincidence? Go ahead, try. Explain what I'm about to present away as random. Many people will try. I have many, many more examples coming in this book. Quick note before I get started, going away from the book for a second. Like raise your hand, for example, when your personal threshold is crossed. So if I get to number 15 and somebody might say, look, at this point, there's no way this is continuing to be a coincidence. Something else is going on with reality itself. What's your threshold? And metaphorically, raise your hand to yourself when it's crossed, whether it be at number 5 or number 20. Or for some people, they'll never raise their hand, which I just don't understand. This is beyond mind-boggling. Let's get started. Number 1. Of course, Kennedy and Lincoln were both assassinated U.S. presidents. Number 2, their last names have 7 letters with the vowels in the exact same place. By the way, don't try to confirm this. These are confirmed over and over again. Don't write the names out and look for the vowels. This is all correct. Just trust me. Back to number 2. Their names have 7 letters with the vowels in the exact same place. Number 3, their assassins were known by 3 names: John Wilkes Booth, Lee Harvey Oswald. That seems to be a repeating theme in our general script in many other places, doesn't it? John Hinckley Jr. Number 4, the assassins both carry 15 letters in their names. Number 5, their path to the presidency was through the House of Representatives. This is actually more notable than you would think, because that's rare. Most presidents come from a governorship or the distinguished Senate. The House of Representatives, many people don't realize, is really considered peons compared to senators. Senators almost would look down on them. So coming to the presidency through the House, very rare. Absolutely a big one here. Each election to the House of Representatives was in 46. Of course, 100 years apart, 1846, 1946. Number 7. Each was elected to the presidency in 60, 1860, 1960. Number 8. Both defeated incumbent vice presidents to win. That's very rare. That's number 8. Number 9. Their vice presidents were both named Johnson, last name Johnson. Really? Okay, that's my threshold, but we'll keep going. Number 10. Andrew Johnson, vice president, born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson, born in 1908. Number 11, they both were ship captains. Number 12, they both suffered from a genetic disease. In the case of JFK, Addison's, and in the case of Lincoln, Marfan's disease, but both genetic diseases. Both were shot in the head. 14, both were shot on Friday. 15, both were seated next to their wives when shot. 16, one shot in a Ford theater, the other shot while riding in a Ford. 17, each assassin did it in his place of employment. The assassin did it where he worked. Both of them. Booth, many people don't realize, he was an actor at the Ford Theater, which is now Ford's Theater, but I think I'm gonna call it Ford Theater. That's what I've always heard. 18. Both assassins died before trial. 19. Both assassins were Southern white males. 20. Both assassins were in their mid-20s, 5'8", with brown hair and brown eyes. 21. Lincoln was killed in Box 7, the balcony of the Ford's Theater. Kennedy was killed in Car 7. Number 22. Both were treated by a Dr. Charles in a building with the initials PH. Lincoln was dragged across the street to Peterson House, and Kennedy, of course, the Parkland Hospital. Both PH initials. I don't know for sure about a Dr. Charles, if anybody wants to look into it. 23. Both VPs died 10 years after their respective assassinations. 24. The VP names have 13 letters, including first and last names if you run them together. 25. Let's see. The man seated next to each president during the assassination had 8 letters in his name: Connolly and Rathbone. Rathbone, of course, next to Lincoln at the Ford's Theater. 26. Both men seated next to each president were injured in the attack. 27. Kennedy had 2 brothers, Robert and Edward. 28. Lincoln had 2 sons, Robert and Edward. 29. Both lost children while living in the White House. 30. Lincoln's secretary was Mr. Kennedy, but still Lincoln's secretary. 31. Kennedy's secretary was Eve Lincoln. You believe that? Lincoln to Kennedy, the secretaries flip-flop. Unbelievable. 32. John Wilkes Booth was born in 1839. You know what's coming. Lee Harvey Oswald, 1939. 33. Booth ran from a theater and was caught in a warehouse. Oswald ran from a warehouse and was caught in a theater. Oswald, the book, it was a book warehouse, book suppository building, depository. He was caught in a movie theater after he busted in and didn't buy a ticket. That's brilliant. It's actually a pretty poorly written script, but let's continue. 34. Both Oswald and Booth were in police custody while assassinated. 35. Abraham filmed Kennedy riding in a Lincoln. Abraham Zapruder filmed Kennedy while riding in a Lincoln. 36. Jefferson Davis was Lincoln's rival and president of the Confederacy during the Civil War, of course. Jefferson Davis Tippit was the officer shot in Dallas by Lee Harvey Oswald, quote, during the Kennedy assassination, or right in the hour that followed. 37. John Kennedy was a detective who actually traveled with Lincoln just before the assassination. He was a bodyguard of sorts to protect him from threats. So we have John Kennedy tasked with protecting Abe Lincoln. If that was the only synchronicity, the only one in the list, it would be amazing. 38. Kennedy's father was the ambassador to England at the court of St. James. Lincoln's son was the ambassador to England at the court of St. James. 39. Kennedy's seat in the Lincoln car, so let me start that again. Kennedy's seat in the Lincoln where he was shot is in the Ford Museum. Lincoln's seat where he was shot is in the Ford Museum. Unbelievable. Now, the car where Kennedy was shot, the Ford Motor Company Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, the Ford Theater is a museum today, but nevertheless the seat is there. I'm going to say this one again, but it is truly mind-boggling. 39. Kennedy's seat in the Lincoln car where he was shot is in the Ford Museum. Lincoln's seat where he was shot is in a museum called Ford. Unbelievable. 40. There are only 2 times an incumbent vice president ran for president and lost. Incumbent VP Nixon lost to Kennedy in 60, and incumbent VP Breckinridge lost to Lincoln in 60. 41. Lincoln had a premonition of his assassination 3 days before. It was expressed in a very scary dream to Lincoln. JFK's premonition about his assassination was expressed to Jackie 3 hours before. Both of these are well noted. Lincoln's dream about his assassination, and Kennedy, his remarks to Jackie 3 hours before. This is a well-documented fake history, or if you prefer, history. 42. Lincoln's body was mourned on a podium called a catafalque. Let me just see if I can pronounce it. Catafalque. Catafalque. I don't know if it's right or wrong. Let me start over. 42. Lincoln's body was mourned on a podium called a catafalque in the East Room of the White House. After his death, JFK was placed on the Lincoln catafalque in the East Room of the White House. 43. JFK's funeral was purposefully meant to mimic Lincoln's, with even the chandeliers draped in black silk, just as it was during Lincoln on the catafalque. Jackie was heavily involved in planning the funeral and admitted on many occasions that she based his funeral exactly off Lincoln's. 44. JFK ran for a Senate seat against political rival Adlai Stevenson II. Adlai Stevenson I, his grandfather, was a known political rival of Abe Lincoln, but they never directly ran against each other. There's a little bit of a difference here, but both politically interacted with Adlai Stevenson. 45. Both assassins had assistants or a conspirator. Booth's conspirator was Lewis Payne. Oswald's was Ruth Payne, Paine. Now, a note to be fair, Lewis, Booth's conspirator, also used the name Lewis Powell in addition to Lewis Payne. 46. The enormous procession of cars for Kennedy's funeral and burial in Arlington Cemetery drove right past the Lincoln Memorial. 47. Jackie Kennedy and Mary Todd Lincoln both had 4 children, 2 of whom died before becoming an adult. 48. Lincoln's son Robert graduated from Harvard. He became a lawyer and served on the cabinets of 2 presidents. JFK's brother, well, you know the rest. Exactly the same thing. 49. On July 16, 1963, Abraham Lincoln Morovitz was nominated by John F. Kennedy to sit on the U.S. District Court of Illinois. John F. Kennedy nominated an Abraham Lincoln Morovitz. I think it's worth being in this list. 50. Only 2 presidents today have national centers for the performing arts. Only 2. The Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts is in New York. It includes the Met, the Metropolitan Opera, and other buildings. The Kennedy Center is in Washington, D.C., and it hosts the Kennedy Center Honors. Bill Clinton has his own building too, but it's a medical center for rape victims. One can imagine a few grad students in an Ivy League library somewhere discovering just 5 or 6 of these and talking about it for an hour, talking about the mind-blowing coincidence that they just uncovered in a cafe smoking hookah. When there are more than 35 of these, something else is going on in reality itself. When you push 50, I don't know what to say, and there are many more coincidences and synchronicities if you want to stretch a bit. There are well over 100 if you want to stretch a little bit. This is all I can say for now. The wake-up process, or getting people to understand that something else is going on here in this reality, something that you couldn't possibly have conceived or even entertained in your mind just a few years ago, but we have to, because the normal explanations on reality don't work anymore. Before moving on, I would like to point this out. If this was all we had to get someone to entertain that reality may be something entirely different than what they believed it to be, if there was nothing more, this Kennedy to Lincoln comparison would be incredibly impressive evidence in its own right, because it's virtually impossible. We have thousands of examples beyond this one people in this community have presented over the years, perhaps not as strong as the 1 in a billion coincidence just presented. Some people would put it about 1 in 10 billion, but close. Some people will now go and research each of these Kennedy to Lincoln synchronicities to try to trip me up. If they find just one that cannot be verified to their satisfaction, or God forbid, if I was mistaken about just one, they will actually use my one mistake to deem this entire book bogus. Remember the mental defense mechanisms we talked about. A conspiracy theorist can make no mistakes. They won't see, of course, the other 30 to 40 to 50 impossible coincidences that I did get right. They will focus on my one mistake. The subconscious will jump through hoops to keep one's worldview intact.